Imagine waking up one morning to news that completely upends the political map of an entire continent. Well, on January 3rd, 2026, that's exactly what happened. The world was absolutely rocked by the news. The US had carried out a major strike in Venezuela. And then this drops. In the early hours of the morning, President Donald Trump announces something few people ever thought would actually happen. The sitting president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, and his wife captured by US forces. Just wow. So, how on earth did we get here? And what does this all mean, really? That's what we're here to break down. We're going to look at the military operation itself, the long and winding road that led to it, and what this incredible move means for Venezuela and for the rest of us. All right, first things first, let's talk about the operation itself. It was a swift, stunning military action, and it had a code name, Operation Absolute Resolve. This whole thing unfolded with breathtaking speed. I mean, look at this timeline. At 2 in the morning, explosions start hitting the capital, Caracas. Just 30 minutes later, a state of emergency is declared. But get this, barely 2 hours after that, it's basically over. President Trump makes the announcement, and by the end of the day, a plane with Maduro on it is landing on U.S. soil. So who pulled this off? Well, the reports say it was the best of the best. We're talking elite units like Delta Force and the 160th SOR, the Night Stalkers. They were the tip of the spear. Their target was incredibly specific, Nicolas Maduro and the First Lady, Cilia Flores. Now, U.S. casualties were incredibly light, but we have to acknowledge the human cost in Venezuela was significant, with reports of at least 40 people killed. And the immediate aftermath was crystal clear. Maduro wasn't just being taken out of power. No, he was being flown straight to New York to face a U.S. federal indictment. We're talking charges of narco-terrorism, conspiracy. This is a legal showdown with massive geopolitical shockwaves. Of course, an operation like this doesn't just happen in a vacuum. You don't just wake up and decide to do this. This was the boiling point after 18 long months of escalating tensions. This was the road to intervention. You can really trace the beginning of the end back to the July 2024 election, which almost everyone outside Venezuela called a total fraud. The new U.S. administration flat out refused to recognize Maduro's government, and from there, things just went downhill fast. A military buildup starts in the Caribbean, and then comes Operation Southern Spear, a full-on campaign of sanctions, labeling local gangs as terrorist, and eventually, U.S. warships actually seizing Venezuelan oil tankers on the high seas. You know, for years, the U.S. had this $15 million bounty on Maduro's head. It was part of this long-running pressure campaign, but it was kind of just there. But then, bam! The bounty suddenly skyrockets by over 230%, all the way up to $50 million. To analysts watching this, it was a blinking red light. This was a clear signal of a massive shift in policy, from just trying to contain Maduro to actively trying to take him out. It's a strategy some call leadership decapitation. And the contrast with just a couple of years earlier is just wild. I mean, back in 2023, there was actually a bit of a diplomatic thaw. You had talks, some sanctions were eased, but by late 2025, it's a completely different world. We're talking a full naval blockade, an economic embargo, and every single diplomatic channel slammed shut. Okay, so this brings us right to the heart of the debate, the real clash of ideas here. On one side, you have the official U.S. justification. And on the other, you have the fundamental principles of international law. The United States laid out its case on a few different fronts. First, they accused Maduro of running a narco state, basically a country whose government is funded by drug money. They charged him and his inner circle with trafficking cocaine. They even designated a powerful group tied to him, the Cartel de los Soles, as a foreign terrorist organization. And of course, the big one, they said this was all necessary to restore democracy. But the view from the United Nations was starkly different. The Secretary General's spokesperson didn't mince words. He immediately condemned the strikes, calling them a dangerous precedent and a clear violation of the UN Charter, which, basically forbids one country from using force against another country's sovereignty. So what does that violation actually mean in legal terms? Well, many experts in international law argue that the U.S. action fits the UN's official definition of the crime of aggression. It's a heavy term, but it essentially means an illegal act of war. And that's the central legal challenge to this whole operation on the world stage. As you can imagine, the global reaction was instant and deeply polarized. It really painted a picture of a world completely divided over what had just happened. You saw the diplomatic fault lines appear almost immediately. Key U.S. allies and some of Venezuela's neighbors, like Argentina, came out in support. But on the other side, global rivals like China and Russia, and even other neighbors like Brazil and Mexico, issued some really strong condemnations. But it wasn't a simple for or against split. A lot of countries landed somewhere in the middle. Nations all across Europe and Asia were calling for restraint. They were basically saying, look, Maduro's regime is bad, but we are deeply concerned about the U.S. just deciding to take military action on its own. So all of this leaves us with the most important and by far the most complex question of all. With Maduro gone, what comes next for Venezuela? President Trump's statement on this was frankly unambiguous. He said the U.S. would, quote, run the country until a transition could be worked out. I mean, let that sink in for a second. This immediately raised these profound questions. Is this an occupation? What does this mean for the very idea of Venezuelan sovereignty? And of course, looming over everything is the oil. Venezuela has the world's largest proven reserves. Now, sure, its current production is just a drop in the bucket globally, but here's the key. Its specific type of heavy crude isn't easily replaced. So who controls these resources now? And the prospect of U.S. companies returning, that's a massive, massive factor in this whole geopolitical game. Security experts are looking at this and seeing three main ways this could all play out. The best-case scenario, a negotiated handover to the opposition, maybe with some amnesty deals. The messy middle ground, a U.S.-backed faction steps in and takes control. And then there's the worst case, a long, drawn-out guerrilla war that just plunges the country into chaos for years to come. And really, this is the central dilemma that 30 million Venezuelans are facing right now. The U.S. promised a judicious transition, but what that actually means, and more importantly, who gets to decide what it looks like, that remains the great and very dangerous unanswered question.